Hey everybody, it's Chris, and I'm going to be talking about the Hexblade. I'm going to be talking about, first and foremost, the Hexblade that we saw in Unearthed Arcana. It was released last week, and I believe the survey will be opening on Tuesday morning, which is probably when I'm also releasing this video, so the survey's probably open right now. I'm recording this on Monday. I would have recorded something last week if I had seen this Unearthed Arcana last week, but I was out of town. My laptop, the wireless wasn't working, so I just didn't have a good opportunity to look at this until Sunday. But I have thoughts about the Hexblade. I want to talk about them in video form so that I can kind of explain the problems I think there are with this subclass, because I think there are pretty significant problems with this subclass, including this Unearthed Arcana version, but not just this Unearthed Arcana version. So I'm going to run through it quickly, and then I'm going to start talking about it. So the Hexblade Patron, this is the Unearthed Arcana version. You made a pact with a sentient magic weapon and the cursed forces contained within its blade. Such a weapon could be the sword sheathed at a warlock's side, or it could be an infamous magic weapon stored elsewhere, projecting its power across the multiverse to further its cunning plans. To those who are willing to follow this weapon's whims, these inscrutable patrons offer the power to bestow malignant curses, deliver punishing blows, and bolster the wielder. And I'm going to skip the design notes for now. We're just going to go right into what is actually here. So we start with Hexblade spells. The magic of your patron ensures you always have certain spells ready. When you reach a warlock level specified in the Hexblade spells table, you therefore always have the listed spells prepared. Level 3, you're going to get Arcane Vigor, Hex, Magic Weapon, Shield, and Wrathful Smite. Level 5, Conjure Barrage and Dispel Magic. Level 7, Freedom of Movement, Staggering Smite. And level 9, Animate Objects and Steel Wind Strike. Then at level 3, we will also get Hexblade Manifest. Your patron grants you the power to summon cursed echoes of its blade to hinder your foes. You gain the following benefits. Hexblade's Curse. You can cast Hex without expending a spell slot, number of times equal to your Charisma modifier, minimum of once, and you regain all expended uses when you finish long rest. When you cast Hex, a spectral weapon resembling your patron orbits the cursed target. Hexblade Maneuvers. Once per turn, when you hit a target cursed with your Hex with an attack roll, you can cause one of these additional effects. Draining Slash. Your target makes a Constitution saving throw against your spell save DC. On a failed save, the target can't make opportunity attacks, and its speed is halved until the start of your next turn. And we'll go up here. Harrowing Blade. The target makes a Wisdom saving throw against your spell save DC. On a failed save, the next time the target makes an attack roll against a creature other than you before you start the start of your next turn, the target takes necrotic damage equal to your Charisma modifier. And Stymieing Mark. The target has disadvantage on the next saving throw it makes before the end of your next turn. That's it at level 3. Then we have level 6, Life Stealer. Your patron's might allows you to drain vitality from those you curse, granting you the following benefits. Hungering Hex. Whenever the target cursed by your Hex drops to 0 hit points, you regain hit points equal to a d8 plus your Charisma modifier. An Inevitable Blade. Once per turn, when you make an attack roll against the target cursed by your Hex and miss, you can deal necrotic damage to that creature equal to your Charisma modifier, minimum of 1. Then we get to level 10, and we have Armor of Hexes. It says, when you take damage from the cursed target of your Hex, you can take a reaction to reduce the damage taken by an amount equal to 2d8 plus your Charisma modifier. You can use this feature a number of times equal to your Charisma modifier, and you gain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. And Masterful Hex. So this is 14th level. Your patron's accursed might flows even more strongly through you, granting you the following benefits. Accursed Critical. Any attack roll you make against a target cursed by your Hex scores a critical hit on a roll of 19 or 20 on the d20. Infectious Hex. When you use one of your Hexblade's maneuvers, you can target one additional creature within 30 feet of the cursed target. The additional target takes a d6 necrotic damage. And Resilient Hex. Taking damage can't break your concentration on Hex. Okay, so that is the Unearthed Arcana version of the Hexblade. And now I want to talk about the Hexblade in general. So we first saw the Hexblade actually not in 5th edition. The first time we saw the Hexblade was in D&D edition 3.5. there was a book called Complete Warrior, and it basically had stuff for martials. And one of the things it had in there was a new class, like a full class, not a subclass or prestige class, called the Hexblade. And the Hexblade was basically a little bit like a fighter, except it had a few spells, and I do mean a few. You didn't get any spells at level 1, but as you went up in levels, you eventually got up to 4th level spells. It also had a feature called Hexblade's Curse, which you could put on a target, and it would have penalties. So it would have minuses to hit and stuff like that. And that was the spells, and the Hexblade's Curse essentially replaced the feats that a fighter would normally get. So instead of getting the extra feats of a fighter, which in 3.5 was a lot of them, they got this Hexblade's Curse and a few spells. It was generally not considered a great class, wasn't considered terrible, but I mean, in the optimization community, I didn't see much happen with the Hexblade at all. It was mostly forgotten. And then they resurrected it in 2017, I believe, with Xanathar's Guide to Everything. But didn't end up being a martial anymore. Now they made it a subclass for warlocks. So why would they do that? Because the Hexblade didn't obviously have a patron, or wasn't a particular kind of patron. It was a fighter that could kind of curse things when it hit it with their weapon. And I think the reason why Hexblade ended up being a subclass for the Warlock was because in 2014 they released the Player's Handbook, and there was the Warlock, and it had, at level 3, it had the ability to choose a pact, and you could choose Pact of the Tome, or Pact of the Chain, or Pact of the Blade. And the idea was, if you chose Pact of the Blade, you could kind of turn your Warlock into a little bit of a martial, right? They could use a weapon, attack multiple times if you got the right invocations, do a little bit of extra damage if they got the right invocations. So the idea was that you could customize your Warlock to be a weapon user. Except it was bad. Pact of the Blade wasn't good in 2014. And until Xanathar's came out, we didn't really see Pacts of the Blade Warlocks very much. Sometimes I saw something where, you might dip Fighter and then go Warlock and then just concentrate on your Strength or your Dexterity instead of your Charisma modifier and, kind of try to work it out that way. But it wasn't good. It was a pretty weak option. I think the designers recognized that. And so they decided that, let's have a subclass that allows the Warlock to customize to use weapons. And I think that's where Hexblade came from. And so what they did is they decided that, we're going to make Pact of the Blade work for this subclass. So we're going to have this subclass be able to use its Charisma modifier in place of Strength or Dexterity when it uses its Pact weapon. And then we'll give it some other stuff that kind of fits the thematics of the Hexblade class from 3.5. I do think they struggled to figure out what the patron would be. Like, I'm going to bring this up here. This is the Hexblade from 2017. You have made your pact with a mysterious entity from the Shadowfell, a force that manifests in sentient magic weapons carved from the stuff of shadow. The mighty sword Black Razor is the most notable of these weapons, which have been spread across the multiverse over the ages. The shadowy force behind these weapons can offer power to warlocks who form pacts with it. Many Hexblade warlocks create weapons that emulate those formed in the Shadowfell. Others forego such arms, content to weave the dark magic of that plane into their spellcasting. Because the Raven Queen is known to have forged the first of these weapons, many sages speculate that she and the Force are one, and that the weapons, along with Hexblade warlocks, are tools she uses to manipulate events on the material plane to her inscrutable ends. So, if you choose Hexblade, who is your patron? Is it a weapon? Is it the force of the Shadowfell? Or is it the Raven Queen? I'm not sure. Maybe all three. Maybe the player chooses. But it's really unclear. Like, it's vague, who your patron is supposed to be. And I like how they put the little funny... In Xanathar's Guide to Everything, the Beholder Xanathar makes a little commentary through it. And he says, Hexblade, what a cool name. So is your sword evil or cursed or something? but you're evil, right? Okay, now I don't like the name. Names aren't cool if they don't make sense. So I think they were kind of poking fun at their own thing here, where they tried to fit a square peg into a round hole. The Hexblade from 3.5 is a fighter that curses things with its sword, and they've tried to fit it into Warlock, and it's not a nice fit because there's no obvious patron. So they kind of came up with some vague stuff. So it's weird. And honestly, the easiest thing to do with the Hexblade would be to discard it, because it's not really needed anymore. Now that the 2024 Player's Handbook came out, Pact of the Blade is actually good. And you can take any kind of Warlock, and you can customize it by taking the right invocations and be decent with a weapon. So we don't require a specific subclass that makes you decent with weapons anymore. All the different Warlock subclasses can be decent with a weapon. So the purpose that Hexblade originally had, we don't really need that anymore. But they also made the Player's Handbook deliberately compatible with old rules, which means the Hexblade still exists. So we have this subclass that exists and is viable for taking, that corrects a problem that is no longer a problem. It fulfills a role that no longer needs to be filled. And so what are we doing with it? Well, we got to update it. We got to do something with it to make it work with the new rules, because we have features within the old Hexblade that are completely obsolete now. You know, one of the features it has is that it can use its charisma with its pact weapon, which all Warlocks can do, so that's not much of a feature anymore. Now, it is questionable whether the old Hexblade actually made Pact of the Blade viable, because I think it probably did. But who knows, because nobody ever took Hexblade to level 3, where they actually got Pact of the Blade. Hexblade, because they threw so much at it at level 1, and because packs were not available until level 3, players, at least in the optimization community, would take one level of Hexblade. We call it a hex dip. We did this all the time with all kinds of builds. You're making a paladin, are you going to hex dip? Making a bard, are you going to hex dip? And you would take one level of Hexblade, and so you would never get Pact of the Blade. So this thing that I think it was trying to correct kind of didn't work for that. Because of just the way the rules worked. It was just awkward. Like I said, square peg, round hole. And now we have this weird fitting subclass that no longer even attempts to correct a problem. Since the problem no longer exists, we have to update it. So what do you do with this thing? And I do think this was the challenge that they had when they decided that they were going to update it. And I do understand why they're going to update it, because you can't just leave it there like this mess. So you got to update it, even though I'm not sure it really fills a required niche for Warlocks. So we ended up with this. Now, the first thing we'll talk about a little bit is the thematics. So they've done away with it's the Shadowfell, or maybe it's secretly the Raven Queen. Now it's a weapon. You're going to have a pact with a sentient weapon. I gotta say the main thing I have with this is that, okay, maybe it's some powerful sentient magic weapon from some other realm that you've made a pact with, and it's no different than making a pact with a powerful fiend from some other realm or whatever. But they kind of indicate that you might have this weapon. But there's no guidance given to a DM about giving a sentient magic weapon to a 3rd level character. And so that's not great. So I still don't think the thematics are wonderful here. And then there is the whole problem with the mechanics. And as I went through it, you probably noticed, if you didn't know already, and you probably did because everybody's been talking about it, all the features are about the Hex spell, other than the Hexblade spells. But Hexblade Manifest, Lifestealer, Armor of Hexes, Masterful Hex, they all make the Hex spell better. And do Warlocks really want to be concentrating on the Hex spell when they get to higher levels? I mean, at low levels, sure. If I am a 3rd level Warlock, I might be still using Hex, and Hex is an okay spell for a Warlock to be using at those lower levels. But if I'm, 10th level, I've got 5th level spells to be casting with pack slots that might be using my concentration that are going to be a heck of a lot more effective than a 1st level spell. So why did they choose to put the whole thing around the Hex spell? Well, I think the reason is because the original version of the class, and kind of the name implies, that you're using a weapon, you hit something, and then you curse it, right? Hexblade. And the Hex spell is kind of a curse too. You curse somebody with Hex, they're going to take additional damage from your attacks. They have a penalty on making an ability check. So it's kind of a curse. So you're going to build this subclass around this ability to curse. Okay. But the mechanics of Hex are not wonderful for this because it uses concentration. So they could potentially take concentration away from the Hex spell. That maybe would have been the way to go. I'm not sure. What I do know is that I'm looking at this and I'm looking at Armor of Hexes and Masterful Hex and thinking, I really don't want to cast Hex at 10th level or 14th level as a Warlock. So, am I even going to get these features? Or are they just features on my character sheet that I never use because I don't really cast Hex anymore? So I think, if you're going to build this subclass around Hex, it has to have features that are so effective combined with Hex that I want to cast Hex, that I don't feel like it's a penalty to access my features because I'm forced to use this spell I didn't want to use. And I don't think they've achieved that. I mean, there are things here that are okay. Like, here's this stymieing mark. I've highlighted that terribly, but the target is disadvantaged on the next saving throw it makes before the start of your next turn. That might be okay. But I'm looking at other things here, like this draining slash. And remember, you have to have them hexed. This happens once on your turn. Target makes a Constitution saving throw against your spell save DC. On a failed save, the target can't make opportunity attacks, and its speed is halved until the start of your next turn. This requires a saving throw? Really? Like, that doesn't seem like it's that good a feature that it should be providing a saving throw. And up here, the target makes a Wisdom saving throw against your spell save DC. On a failed save, the next time the target makes an attack roll against a creature other than you before the start of your next turn, so maybe not at all. But if it does, and it failed to save, then it takes necrotic damage equal to your charisma modifier. That doesn't seem great to me either. So I'm looking at level 3, and I'm just not seeing a whole lot of benefit to using Hex beyond if there's some kind of combination I could use with Stymieing Mark. Now, I'm already concentrating on Hex, so I'm not, hitting them with a concentration spell, but maybe an ally is. So maybe it's something I could do, in combination with somebody else. So maybe. But then I get to level 6. I really don't want to be casting Hex anymore at level 6 normally. What do I get? I get whenever target cursed by my Hex drops to 0 points, I regain hit points equal to a d8 plus my charisma modifier. That's not a huge amount. I am just reminded of the Fiend Patron dropping enemies or an ally dropping enemies without having to have Hex on them. And I'm getting, I think it's a d8 plus my Warlock level in temporary hit points. So this just seems a lot worse than that. And then we get Inevitable Blade once per turn. When you make an attack roll against a target cursed by your Hex and miss, you can deal necrotic damage to that creature equal to your charisma modifier. So it's a little bit like the Grey's Weapon Mastery, except I have to have Hex on them, and it's only once per turn. So it's worse than the Grey's Mastery that fighters get at level 1, and rogues and rangers and paladins and barbarians. But here, no, I mean, it's worse than what they get at level 1, a fair bit worse. So do either of those level 6 features make me want to cast Hex? No, I want to be casting Hypnotic Pattern or something else with my 3rd level pack slots to concentrate on rather than concentrating on Hex. So it's not much of a feature. I think to make this work, though Hungering Hex and Inevitable Blade would need to be so good that I think I would rather do these than cast Hypnotic Pattern. then I think it could work. And we, like I said, we get into Armor Hexes and Masterful Hex. I'm already not wanting to cast Hex with this character, and there's nothing here that's so good that it makes me want to cast Hex. So I'm either penalizing myself by casting Hex because I want to use my subclass features, which obviously I would want to do, or I'm ignoring them, and then I'm not getting the value of a subclass. So I totally understand why there is this huge backlash against this subclass. I get it. I don't think the issue is necessarily, though, that they've tied it to Hex. I kind of see the thematics behind it. My issue is that they have tied it to Hex and they have not made Hex worth casting. That, at least at higher levels. And that's the problem. I did notice, by the way, that the Hexblade spells include some pretty good spells on there. I don't hear people talking about that, but I mean, there's one spell to me that really stands out on this list, and that's Conjure Barrage. I mean, this is a great spell to have as a pack spell for a Warlock. It creates a 60-foot cone, and that is massive. And normally the problem with something that would create that big an area is that you would have friendly fire, but Conjure Barrage has no friendly fire. You choose who is affected by it. It's also thematic for a Hexblade, because it says you brandish the weapon used to cast a spell and conjure similar spectral weapons or ammunition appropriate to the weapon that launch forward and then disappear. So it kind of fits the idea where your patron is a weapon, and then you're going to manifest these weapons to affect your enemy. Each creature of your choice that you can see in a 60-foot cone makes the dexterity saving throw, taking 5d8 force damage on a failed save or half as much on a successful one, and it upcasts with a d8 per spell level. So with pack slots, it's going to get better with your 4th level slot and your 5th level slot. And Conjure Barrage is not available to anybody but Rangers normally, and it's not even available to Bards anymore because Magical Secrets can't access the Bard spell or the Ranger spell list. So this is really the only way you're going to get Conjure Barrage and not be a Ranger. And of course, if you're a Ranger, you got to be 9th level to even get Conjure Barrage, and then it's going to scale very, very slowly because you're a Ranger. But here you would get it at level 5, and by level 9, you're casting it with a 5th level spell slot. So that, I think, is something I didn't see mentioned online, but I read this and it jumped out at me right away that this is a fantastic spell for a Warlock to get. Otherwise, the Hexblade spells are okay. Arcane Vigor does upcast, but it requires the use of your hit dice, and it doesn't upcast great, so I don't love it on a Warlock, though I get why a Hexblade might have it. Magic Weapon, I certainly understand, but it is really unfortunate. I'm actually going to bring that up. So I like Magic Weapon in the 2024 rules, and it's normally not available to Warlocks. It's a bonus action to cast. You touch a non-magical weapon until the spell ends. That weapon becomes a magic weapon with a +1 bonus to attack rolls and damage rolls. Spell ends early if you cast it again. The bonus increases to a +2 with a level 3 to 5 level spell slot, and the bonus increases to +3 with a level 6+ spell slot. So this is why it's so unfortunate to have it on the Warlock spell list, is because our pack slots max out at level 5. So we never get to the +3, and we basically get no scaling at level 4 and 5. So that is pretty unfortunate. I was fairly excited when I saw Magic Weapon on the list until I looked it up and saw that the +3 came with the 6th level spell slot. Just missed. Almost good, but not quite. Shield, of course, can be a good spell, but you don't want to cast it with pack slots. Because it's going to be a higher level. So if you're multi-classed and you normally wouldn't have access to Shield, like maybe you're a Bard, Warlock, or something, then I'd be glad Shield is there. Wrathful Smite is a decent spell to cast at 1st level, but it's not a great upcast spell because the damage scales slowly, though it does scale. So if we cast it with a 5th level spell slot, we do extra damage, but it's scaling with D6s, which isn't ideal for Smite spells. Dispel Magic is decent. Freedom of Movement is decent. Staggering Smite, same thing as Wrathful Smite. It doesn't upcast that well, though it's already 4th level, so that's not too bad. Animate Objects upcast really well. You won't be upcasting it, but it's still an okay spell. And Steel Wind Strike is, I think, a good spell for a Warlock to have. So the Hexblade spells actually is good. And it's interesting. I saw the online reaction, and nobody was talking about the spells. But this is a good list for a Warlock to get. But I do think it gets overshadowed by the fact that we have all these features. They're all based on a spell that the features don't make us want to cast. And I know that the survey is going to come out and people are going to hate on this. And I don't blame them. I totally understand. I kind of hate on it myself. I do think that the issue isn't that it's based on Hex. I think the issue is that it has not made Hex appealing. And if it's not going to make Hex appealing, then I don't want to cast it. And if I don't want to cast it, then I don't get my subclass features. You got to make me want to cast Hex for this to work. And I'm not convinced that the Hexblade is a subclass that should even necessarily be a Warlock subclass. Maybe it should be a fighter subclass. Because, they kind of bend over backwards to say, oh, you don't have to use weapons with this Hexblade. Yeah. I'm not in love with the thematics of the Hexblade, and I definitely am not in love with the way they've tried to make Hex appealing here, because I don't think they've hit the mark. But I will say that in my survey, I'm going to point out that I think if you want us to cast Hex, you better make it worthwhile. Because I'm giving up other concentration spells to cast it. So either the features have to be so good that it's worth concentrating on, or remove the concentration for Hexblade. I think those are basically your two options. And one way or the other, I'm not in love with the idea of a subclass for Warlock that specializes in Pact of the Blade. Does this specialize in Pact of the Blade? Not really, I guess, but it thematically it kind of does. And I don't love that it's got a thematic here at the top where it says that you might have a magic weapon, but DMs, we're not going to tell you what to do about that. I'm not in love with that either. So there's a lot here I'm not super happy about. I get why they figure that Hexblade needs to be addressed and updated. And yeah, backwards compatibility is a bitch. Because if the game wasn't backwards compatible, they could introduce Hexblade as a subclass for fighter, and it would be fine. But because it is a subclass for Warlock, if you can update it, you kind of have to keep it a subclass for Warlock, and I don't think that's great. Yeah, so not in love with it. And of this entire document, I read it through. The Hexblade was the one I think I liked the least. But I didn't love the first version, and I do understand why they had to update it. But it's kind of an ugly situation because they've got this stupid subclass in the game that's not needed anymore. And what do you do with it? Yeah, I'm not convinced what they did with it works all that well. But let me know what you think of the Hexblade. I think this is where I'll tie up the video. So until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.